Well, President Trump is no stranger to criticism.
What a stupid question that is. What a stupid question. But I watch you a lot. You ask a lot of stupid questions.
And he's willing to put himself at more risk of more criticism in order to push and expand gun rights. And that's what we're going to look at today as he tried to help a Hollywood friend out who got denied those gun rights. And we're going to talk about why he was denied and how this can trickle down to everyday people like me and you, and hopefully open up a bigger conversation for something that is so important when it comes to gun rights, denials, and the restoration of your rights after a period of time, which seems to be indefinitely. So we're going to talk about it, and of course I want to hear your opinion, no matter if you agree or disagree. Let me know what you think down below. Let's go ahead and jump right in. There's not too many friends of President Trump that reside in a place called Hollywood, but he does have a couple, and Mel Gibson is one of those. Now, if you grew up in the 80s or 90s, it was pretty much impossible to not see at least a few movies that Mel Gibson was in. He's been obviously director and been a part of some of the biggest movies of those time periods, even into the early 2000s. And he also shows support for President Trump, which at this point in his career doesn't really put you at odds with anybody. But as you see with most people in Hollywood, they would never come out and actually claim to be friends or supportive of pretty much anybody that has a R next to their name. So you won't see this too often, and I think that's why some people kind of attach themselves to these celebrities, even though I think it's not a good idea to ever do that, no matter what they believe in. There are some out there that are actually really good, or they get to the end of their career and they're like, you know what, look, I am so tired of living under this bubble that I'm just going to say whatever the hell I want to now. And those are typically the ones that we see. And while there are some that come from a more traditional background, typically if you want to get jobs out there, you better be thinking blue or keep your mouth shut. So Elizabeth Oyer, who was the pardon attorney for the Department of Justice, was actually fired last week. And she said that it was because she denied Mel Gibson's gun right restoration process, and Trump didn't like it, so he fired her. Now, none of that is actually proven. There are some reports that say she should really consider this because he is a friend of the president. Mel Gibson is who we're talking about here, of course, and that she should really consider it. Take all this with a grain of salt, because we're really only getting one side of the story. But even if we assume that's true, I actually seen that she had a list, and she was tasked with this, and I don't know if it was from direct orders of the president to look at people for gun rights to be restored, or why she was tasked with this, but essentially she had a list of 95 people. And let's look at these 95 people and let's see who should have their gun rights restored and who has very slim chances of rescinding back into some of the actions that got them in trouble initially. Well, she dwindled that list down to 9. So you're only talking about 10% of these people, which highlights a bigger issue, I think, here. But then Mel Gibson was added to the list, right? President Trump wants you to take a look at him. Now, back in 2011, he had a domestic dispute with a ex-wife or an ex-girlfriend. I think they were actually married at the time with a child, right? So they have this domestic dispute. He pleads no contest, and so that basically absolves him of any wrongdoing. But then, of course, any domestic misdemeanor, domestic conviction means you lose your gun rights. Now, let me go ahead and say this. Any domestic issue that you may be involved with, and this is why I've talked about this in the past, especially if you are not getting along with your spouse currently, and it's getting to a point of yelling, right? Just yelling, you got to consider removing yourself from that situation, and the sooner the better. Because look, are any of us perfect? Have any of us had raised voices in a conversation with our spouse? Well, for the vast majority of us, of course, at some point you've had that. But once it starts getting to the point of you having constant screaming matches, God forbid any kind of physical anything that's outside of the intimate part of a relationship, you really need to consider removing yourself, like now. Taking time to get yourselves apart, cool off, counseling. There's all kinds of things you can do after that, but still just screaming matches. And if they get really bad, in some states, they're going to take somebody to jail. If there is a domestic call whatsoever, one of you is going to jail. A lot of states are like that. And guess what? You're going to lose your gun rights. The Lautenberg Amendment back in the 90s essentially made it where any misdemeanor, domestic issue or conviction, you lose your gun rights. And there is no restoration process there. Now, the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act went a step further to close the so-called boyfriend loophole. So any long-term or relationship where you're living with a person that you don't have to be married with, any long-term relationship, that also can be considered for domestic issues. And again, it doesn't matter if it's a misdemeanor, it never goes away. It will follow you forever. And for the vast majority of us, we know that if you're talking about hurting a spouse to a child, of course we don't want those people having firearms. The problem comes in, and I say that, and I think some people may be like, well, no, you just defended people. No. If you're actually hurting your spouse or child, absolutely not. The problem comes in when you have that domestic dispute, and let's say 20 years passes. You've had nothing from that mark for 20 years, right? Similar to Mel Gibson's case, by the way. And they say, nope, you're still a danger to society. No guns for you. How can you justify that? So for things that you said, you could lose your gun rights forever. Nothing physical at all. Now look, I think there are some crimes out there that are irredeemable. I really do. People that pay for the crimes with that time, and again, hopefully rehabilitated, should have those rights restored. There has to be some kind of restoration process there. And the other part of it is, if your spouse hates guns, right? Y'all get into an argument. She tells the police, oh, he has guns, he threatened me. And you're in one of those states, somebody's going to jail, then what happens? Without any due process, your firearms are removed. That's the biggest issue here. That is why you will see gun right groups push back on this whole idea. It's not because we want to see women or children especially get hurt. We don't want to see either one of them get hurt. It's because you're taking rights away for crimes that have never been committed. Even temporary removal of firearms is impeding on constitutional rights, but then you can tell a woman who really is in fear of her spouse that you have to wait a minimum of 10 days to get a firearm in some states. You see, it's not really about, and I'm sure there's some out there that have some good intentions and they want to see people protected, right? And I understand that domestic issues they go far and deep and wide, and we're not going to touch all of that. But the point is, there's some out there that care, right, about this whole issue, but there's others that just see these little opportunities to strip the rights of Americans. And it doesn't matter if you're man, woman, or child. It doesn't matter if it's a domestic issue on one side or the other, right? Why isn't there a provision in place that if you have a restraining order, an active restraining order against somebody that is known, right, that has proven themselves to be violent against you, that a waiting period is removed 100% of the time? It shouldn't even be there in the first place, let's just be honest. But if your state has that and they care about you and protecting you, well, they should care about you enough that you can protect yourself and buy that firearm. Go through your background check, whatever it needs to happen. Again, those are separate issues that we can talk about another day, but no waiting period 100% of the time. See how they talk out of both sides of their mouths. So if this attorney was fired over not approving Mel Gibson's gun right restoration, I think we should look at, well, why did she deny it? How can you justify something if over the past from 2011 to 2025, he hasn't had any crimes, not been involved in anything? She kind of recollected an incident from 2006. But even she admitted that she didn't know everything about what happened in 2011. So how can you say that, oh, yep, your gun rights should not be restored? That's what we really need to look at. And I hope this opens up a can of worms that cannot be closed any longer, and that people that, no matter if you're involved in some kind of domestic issue or not, they actually have to take into account what kind of domestic issue it is. And if you're convicted, you lose your gun rights, there has to be a restoration process after a certain amount of time that you've shown that, hey, I made a mistake, hasn't happened since, you should have those rights restored. And I looked to see how many celebrities have their gun rights restored, and it's just as hard for celebrities as just regular people to have their rights restored. I think Snoop Dogg had something like carrying a gun in the 90s that he was convicted of. Mark Wahlberg has something from way back then as well. Most of them do get denied. And I think in Mark Wahlberg's case, he actually dropped it because it caused a bunch of controversy from something that happened like 25 years ago. It's insanity. So anyways, regardless of what Hollywood does, it is an American right. And if we, hopefully, if Mel Gibson's case can bring to light some kind of amendment to the Lautenberg Amendment to make it possible so people can have their gun rights restored. That's the most important part of this, and maybe Trump opened the door for that. We'll just have to see. Let me know your opinion down below. Big thanks to you guys for watching. See you in the next one. And as always, hold them down.